If you're in the VC space, which is what I moved into after running an agency for many years, you will see literally 7,000 decks a year. Of those 7,000 decks a year, we might talk to 200 or 300. We might invest in 50. Out of those 50, maybe 2 or 3 of them go on to be a big success, and maybe another 10 or so are kind of a moderate success. And so like 10 successful startups out of 7,000 is a pretty challenging hit rate, to be honest. Product market fit is it's a little bit like deciding whether you're in love. Going back to that thing around kind of like, you know it when you feel it. And if you have to go and ask your partner a 10 or 20 point survey to see whether you're in love, you're probably not in love yet.
Hi, welcome to Rand Talks Design, where we dive into the intersection of design, startup, and growth. Today, I'm beyond excited to have Andy Butt on the show. If you've been in design for a while, you probably already know Andy. He co-founded the UK's first UX design agency, Clear Left. He has shaped the design community in countless ways and now has ventured into the world of venture capitalists and coaching. Today, I'm sitting down with Andy to discuss his newest book, The Growth Equation. This is the only growth book that's written from a design perspective. And today, Andy breaks down the reasons why most startups fail, the role of design in startup success, and how founders and designers can better work together. If you are a designer in the startup world, a founder trying to figure out how design fits into your growth strategy, or just someone interested in the messy and unpredictable journey of startup, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Well, hello, Andy. Thank you so much for joining the show. I'm so excited that you are here today. You are one of my design heroes, and part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast is to talk to my design heroes. So I'm so excited that you are here today. And I've been following your work for a long time. You've been advocating for design, for UX, to be honest, before the most of us even know what UX was. So I know it's time for me to reach out when you wrote your new book, The Growth Equation, which is the only design-oriented growth book out there. I think it's incredibly important that this book come out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can't wait. So you have worked with many founders and startups. Throughout your career, you coach, you invest, and we all know most startups fail. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest reasons that startups fail?
I mean, there's so many. Startup is a really high risk space. If you're in the VC space, which is what I moved into after running an agency for many years, you will see literally 7,000 decks a year. Of those 7,000 decks a year, we might talk to 200 or 300. We might invest in 50. Out of those 50, maybe 2 or 3 of them go on to be a big success, and maybe another 10 or so are kind of a moderate success. And so like 10 successful startups out of 7,000 is a pretty challenging hit rate, to be honest. There are lots of reasons why people fail at a startup. I think some of them are non-obvious. I think most people have this idea that the best products succeed. I always did. I mean, coming from a designer, I love the idea that like all you need to do is build an amazing product. You do your research, you understand the market, you build a solution that is better than anything else out there, and your product is destined to succeed. And look, honestly, that's a big part of that. You want to have a product that's better than what's out there in the market. The problem is it can't just be 5% better, 10% better. As UX designers, as sort of HCI type people that understand psychology, we understand that actually switching costs are really difficult. People get into this habit of satisficing. We'll be happy to use a product that's kind of okay, but isn't great, even if there's loads of better ones around, because it messes up with our processes, our habits. Switching is a pain. What happens if you do switch and then there's a bug, or the company goes out of business, or there's lots of reasons, there's lots of friction that gets in the way from you switching. And so in order for your product to kind of draw new users to it, it can't just be like 5% better or 10% better. It has to be 50% better, 100% better, 1,000% better. People talk in the startup world around a 10x product. This idea that a product has to be 10 times better to get people over. And so I do think that design and product in and of itself is massively important to the success of a product. But there's a load of other things that go on the way. One of the big challenges isn't just whether the product is good or not, is whether the team can execute. Do you have a good founder? Does the founder and the founding team have connections in the marketplace? Are they able to sell? Are they able to get your first 50, 100, 1,000 customers in to start using the product? Are they good at assembling a team? Can they build a team that is delivering value really, really quickly and fast enough? Because a lot of the problem isn't like, particularly with a funded startup, the problem isn't will they ever be able to build a product that people will use? It's can they build it fast enough before they run out of money? Or can they build enough of momentum before they have to go out and raise again? So there's a whole bunch of kind of business things, sales things, marketing things that are kind of unrelated to the quality of the product. And so really that's what the book's about. I'm sure we'll get into more detail in a second, but the whole idea of the book is like how to help founders succeed in the first couple of years of business, because that's where the risks are. That's where like 90% of companies sort of disappear in the first couple of years. And so if I get more people through those first critical years, hopefully we'll have many more businesses, we'll have many more people employing teams, we'll have a lot more value in the world. And so that was kind of really the goal with the book.
I know a lot of startups, like especially early stage startups, they don't have a designer because they have very limited resources. I wonder, where do you think designer can play a bigger role in startups to avoid some of those pitfalls?
I mean, this is a really, really interesting, critical question. And I'm still weirdly on the fence. On one hand, I think design is really, really important to the success of a startup. As we talked about before, a big part of the success is building a product that is significantly better than the competition. And I think designers play a crucial role in getting there. Like we call in the industry product market fit. I think designers are brilliant at helping the founders figure out product market fit. I think a lot of the time, founders that go down a path of starting a startup and raising funding because they have this sort of image in their head of what a good product looks like. And the whole first 6 months of their drive is purely to get their vision out. And so anything that gets in their way or anything that contradicts their vision, they're not going to listen to. And so a lot of the time, I think early designers really struggle to help founders because they will be suggesting doing research and discovery. They'll be suggesting trying out different things. But the founder has this sort of burning desire just to get their vision launched. And so I meet lots of designers that kind of join early stage startups that feel like they get a little bit steamrolled, that all they're doing is building. They're trying to build the vision of the founder, and they're not able to kind of cut through to talk about usability and improving onboarding, all this kind of stuff. What I tend to find happens though, is that once the founder's vision launches, it's never enough. There's usually problems and bugs. It's usually not positioned properly. The website makes a whole bunch of inferences that the customers will understand what this thing is when they don't. They make inferences that the customers will understand why this is different, when they don't. When people sign up, the founder will infer that people will get the value immediately, rather than building a great onboarding process, rather than connecting that value and getting people to come back time and time again. And so a lot of founders, they launch thinking they're going to go stratospheric. And instead, there's a little dribble of customers. A couple of people sign up and then they churn, and a couple of people more sign up and they get really frustrated. And I think that's often when designers have the biggest opportunity to influence, because you're no longer fighting against the founder's vision. You're trying to use your kind of problem-solving mindset and your empathy and understanding of user needs to go, well, this first version hasn't worked, but what if we improve this aspect? What if we use, add this functionality or that functionality, or make this feature or value more reasonable? And so I think the best place to kind of have input is usually post-launch, but pre-product market fit. Now, on saying that, like the advice I would give to most founders is get a designer in early. I think designers can be a great sounding board. I think a lot of founders really struggle to visualize their thinking, and having a designer on early to sketch things out, to create Figma prototypes, to help manifest what's in their head and to stress test it can be really, really helpful. I think the downside is that designers are generally able to deliver much more work than a small sort of new engineering team can deliver. So what I tend to find is like the first, month or two, the designers are building out the vision. And then the engineers are delivering that vision for the next 6 or 7 months. And so often those designers then find themselves sort of sitting around twiddling their thumbs. So quite often to early stage founders, I'll actually recommend that they maybe hire a freelancer initially. Like get that initial idea, get that initial thinking, the initial brainstorming, build up a backlog of work for the engineers to work on, and then maybe work 1 day a week to service that. And so again, like you might find that 6 months in, 9 months in, that's when I'm often finding founders come back to me and wanting to hire their first full-time designer. So yeah, that was a big long answer to a simple question, but I'll stop there and see if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, that is super fascinating because I am personally currently working at a Series A startup. So I was hired as part of, I think I was employee number 10. So I definitely have experienced exactly what you just described in the company. There's a lot of visioning and Figma prototyping, which is great. I'm happy to do that. A lot of throwaway designs and very limited resources. So most of the design wasn't even realized. So that's interesting. So in your opinion, you should bring in a full-time designer after the launch.
I mean, look, a lot of it, I think, depends on resources. If you've got who is a designer, comes from a design background, I think that's brilliant. I think if you've got budget, I would love to see you bring a designer on at the start. But the reality is, and I hate saying this, but I see a lot of really high quality initial products on the market that have never been near a designer, because there is such a profusion now of design libraries, languages, systems that engineers can kind of adopt, and they don't need a lot of kind of design knowledge. And so they can push things out that look pretty good from a visual point of view. They look a little bit generic, and if you know design, you will know that they've not been hand built and handcrafted. But for those early 10, 50, 100 customers, they probably don't care. I would love to say bring a designer in full time early on from day one. But I think a lot of founders don't realize they need the higher level of design. A lot of founders in the early stages equate design to making something look pretty. They see it more like interior design. A lot of founders think that interior design in the early stages is sort of a frivolous, not a necessity. I actually see design more like architecture. It's something that you get in from day one, you build from the ground up. But if founders haven't seen the value yet, the worst thing I find is having an architect kind of designer fighting against a founder that thinks they've hired an interior designer. And that never works. And unfortunately, in that instance, who's going to leave the company ain't going to be the founder. And so you can get a lot of friction early on. I guess the way I look at it is like, you need the founder to have made a few mistakes. You need that founder to have realized that there's something around the way the product is working that is not landing with the audience. And so they need to come to you. They need to come to a user-centered designer to say, look, something isn't working. I need your help. What can we do? And then when that relationship is set, then the designer has the ability to actually deliver. Before that, it's fighting and churn. For a lot of designers, I just don't think they want to be in that kind of environment. So I'd avoid being in that sort of like weird dip at the start.
Should founders be more open-minded?
Well, that's an interesting and that's a leading question. I don't think the situation is ideal, but it's also human nature. Like, this is the weird thing. Like, as designers, we're meant to be empathetic, and we are. Like, we're really good at listening to our customers and understanding their needs and understanding their foibles and realizing that the way that they think isn't the same way as maybe we think or the engineer think or the founder thinks. And a lot of our job as designers is to kind of change the mental model of the product to align with the user needs. So I think that's a brilliant skill that designers have. But they never apply that to the rest of the team. They never apply that empathy to understanding what the founder needs or what the CTO needs or what the CMO needs. Often we're sort of battling against that. I just don't think it, I would love to say, I'd love to be in a world where everybody immediately just got design, but that's just not practical. So we need to take a slightly more mature approach, and we kind of need to sort of service the things that our founders believe they want, but be there to support them if those things don't work and step in with a higher level of solution. So yeah, I think it's our problem. I don't think it's our founders' problem, to be honest.
I do think it's two-sided. Definitely designers should be more pragmatic. If you don't have resources, and suggesting doing a lot of foundational research would not be the best solution. Since now we're at the founders and designers, I remember in one of your previous podcasts, you mentioned that more designers should be founders. So I want to ask, why do you think there aren't a lot of designer founders?
I mean, here's a really weird thing. And I will answer that question, but I'll answer it in a weird roundabout way. So I think there is a fundamental sort of mental model or philosophy that designers have that they don't even realize they have, that is a blocker. When I speak to most designers, when I do my coaching with design leaders and with senior ICs, they view product as a game of chess. And in a game of chess, it's you either win or lose. You're either better, and if you're better than the opponent, you win, and if you're worse, you lose. And also in a game of chess, a lot of it is down to not making errors. You make a forced, accidental rash move and you lose a pawn and the whole game can be destroyed. And so a lot of designers are really quite risk averse. I meet so many designers when a CEO or when a product manager says, hey, we're going to do this really cool thing using AI. Their response isn't, hey, that's really great, I'd love to play around with AI. Their response is, but how do we know our users even want that? We need to go out and we need to do a ton of research to kind of validate this idea. And I get it. But there's this drive to sort of validate everything. And there's almost like a pushback. Every time someone says, hey, what about this crazy idea? We tend to go, no, no, no. I sometimes joke, how many designers does it take to change a light bulb? Well, first we need to do 6 months research into the role of light in society. And I think a lot of product managers and founders get this feeling when they talk to designers. Every time someone says, can you screw in a light bulb? They think it's a really easy problem. And the designers are going, well, no, no, no. How do we know that a light bulb is the right solution? What about a candle? What about a torch? What about a headlamp? And 9 times out of 10, it probably is a light bulb. But, we need to kind of do that. It's almost like our process. It's our stretching before the big match. We need to zoom out. There's a whole kind of Eero Saarinen quote around, to design a chair, you need to understand the room. To design the room, you need to understand the building. To design the building, you need to understand the city block. And so there's a natural tendency for designers to immediately zoom out. But that zooming out approach for a lot of our business partners feels like we're moving away from the solution rather than towards it. Often because they've never been in design and they don't know that we need to move away before. Any time that somebody in the organization is moving further from the target, it feels risky. And so, of course, our business partners are, every time they see that behavior, no, 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 you need to move towards the target. We're in a hurry, we're in a rush, we're going to be out-competed. You need to move towards the target. So we have this sort of chess perfect game mindset. And we think that the more books we read, the more conferences we go to, the more podcasts we listen to, we will get better at this single game of chess and we'll be able to win. And I fundamentally believe that most business is a game of cards, whereby you play lots of hands. The hands are random often, they're incomplete. You're going to lose a lot. You will lose a lot more than you win. But when you start to win, you will see the pattern and you'll start to bet bigger and bigger and bigger. And designers really hate this. Designers really hate the fluidity and the lack of preparation and the random nature of a game of cards. But I think the early stages of a startup is like that. And so a lot of the designers that I meet that I'm trying to encourage to be founders don't have that willingness to play the risks. Or often they don't at the start. The thing I find is a lot of designers that become founders, they start immediately with I want to do loads of research, I want to do loads of prototyping, yada, 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 as you would in a good design process. And then it turns out that product doesn't work either. And then they start to kind of find a middle path. They start to be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more willing to try things out that might not work, that aren't completely validated. And eventually, I think design founders can be the best founders around because they've developed a kind of flexibility and fluidity that they didn't have before. But it's really rare. I think also just the risk. I mean, if you're a designer and you're getting, 100K, 150K a year working for a big company, the risk of giving all that up to go and start something that might not go anywhere is just really, really risky. So I think it's a challenge. But on the other hand, I think we've got good examples. We've got companies, I guess a classic would be somebody like Airbnb, who, they're the exception rather than the rule, but they have used all of their design knowledge possible to start a business that's gone huge. And so I would love to see more designers start businesses. And one of the things I try and do with my coaching is to encourage that. So we're getting there. But some of it's also visibility. Like, if most of the founders you see are ex-engineers or ex-product managers, that's going to encourage more and more of the same. So we need to start with some visibility. The more design founders we see, the more founders we get. A great example of that is a feedback management tool in the UK called Plane. And that's run by one of the heads of design for Deliveroo, which is a big food delivery service in the UK. And it's great seeing a former head of design now be the CEO and founder of a company. So I definitely encourage more of that.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I hope more and more designers become founders as well. So in your book, you mentioned that you have to play a lot of hands and you have to keep pivoting until you gain traction and then eventually hit this like euphoria called PMF, product market fit. So what does product market fit looks like? Are there like telltale signs that you hit it or you haven't?
It's a weird one. And I think if you read a lot of the sort of the articles around product market fit, it can be even harder to kind of gauge, because a lot of people will say something on the lines of, you'll know product market fit when you get there. Product market fit is effectively this idea, like if you imagine, like part of the book is actually this idea that there's an equation, this sort of growth equation. And the two sides of the growth equation are product related stuff and market related stuff. Now, one of the things I tend to find, going back to your first question around why things fail, is I often see a lot of product focused founders, engineers, product managers, designers, who put all of their focus on the product side of the equation and never get the market right, never get the marketing, never get the sales right. Or you also see a smaller number of people that come from more of a business world and they're really good at the market side, but the product never stands up. And so you've got to get both in balance. And that's what product market fit is. Product market fit is effectively having a product that is delivering consistent value to your customers in a way that those customers can access, get that value, feel really good about it, and kind of tell their friends. And so it becomes obvious, and you just start to see that once you get there, almost without effort, things start growing. More people start coming on board. They start telling their friends. More people start joining. They're sticking around rather than churning. And so it is this thing where people say, if you're asking whether you've got product market fit, you don't have product market fit. Now, there are some tests you can do. There's a really, really classic test, which everyone talks about in the literature, which is asking your customers how disappointed they would be if your product doesn't exist. And, if, people, say that they wouldn't really mind if your product didn't exist, like, 1 out of 4, whatever the metric is, I can't remember off the top of my head at the moment, then you don't have product market fit. But if 50, 60, 70% of your customers say they'd be really, really disappointed if your product didn't exist, then you know that your product is serving some kind of niche. It's kind of like an NPS score, but for people that hate NPS scores. I don't have a problem with NPS scores, but I think I'm the rare designer that doesn't. I think most of the people I know in the design world will spend hours explaining why NPS is terrible. The weird thing is I agree, but I don't think it matters whether it's terrible or not, because this isn't science. It's just a kind of a sense of customer satisfaction, and one mediocre metric is as good as another. But I guess my point is, and what I say to people with product market fit, is it's a little bit like deciding whether you're in love. Going back to that thing around kind of like, you know it when you feel it. And if you have to go and ask your partner a 10 or 20 point survey to see whether you're in love, you're probably not in love yet. So yeah, product market fit, you'll know it when you're there.
Sounds like it's something that you would know when you have hit it. Like there is a very obvious sign that you have hit that spot.
Yeah. Because growth starts picking up, retention starts picking up, referrals start picking up, all the parts of the pirate funnel, all of the metrics, all the North Star metrics just start clicking. And yeah, so it's one of those things that if you don't have it, you will really know. But overnight or over a few months' time, once you've got that perfect combination of product and market proposition, everything starts working and it's great.
Yeah, so MVP is super important for you to launch and for you to get validation in the market. I know there's a lot of mistakes around MVP, and you mentioned a bunch of examples in your book as well. What are some of the common mistakes that founders and designers make around building their initial MVP?
This is the interesting thing. Like, MVP is effectively research. It's effectively putting the smallest thing out in the market that you can use to test a hypothesis. Now, a lot of the time these days, that hypothesis isn't technical. It used to be the case that, like, can we even build this thing? And maybe with AI, we're seeing the sort of almost the re-emergence of the technical MVP, because for so long, we pretty much could build anything we could imagine. Nowadays, we're not sure whether actually the accuracy is going to be right, etc., etc. And so the sort of technical MVP is coming back. But the key thing is minimal. The key thing is like the smallest thing you could possibly do to get the signal that you need to invest in the next phase. I've met founders who have literally spent a year, 18 months building a product under the real belief that the thing they're building is minimal. And again, I talk in the book about one founder that did exactly this, and they were really frustrated, and the product wasn't working. And as the money started running out, they did like one last Hail Mary pass where they're like, okay, look, we've probably got enough money for the next few months. Let's just strip everything back and let's build something that really is small. We're not going to have account management. We're not going to have sign up. We're not going to have all the things we've been building. We are just going to literally stick the app live on our website, and people can come to it and they can start playing around. And if they want to then sign up, then they can sign up to kind of save an account. And suddenly this exposing of the product and the simplest version of the product started to catch on, because people wouldn't just come to the website and go, what is this? They would come to the website, they would use it. They go, oh, this is interesting. I'll come back in a week's time. And they come back in a week's time and they use it again. And they slowly build these usage behaviors. And through usage, you kind of learn what's working and what isn't working. And, there are certain things you can definitely tell will work through research. But there are certain things that you have a hunch that will work, and you'll only know from putting it out there. This is probably a really terrible example, but, I often, again, look back to Airbnb. Like, I think if you were working in a hotel chain and you had your amazing kind of design research team, and they went out and they did a survey around like, hey, customers at the Marriott, like you're happy staying in a hotel that has a bar and a gym and a sauna and a restaurant and like fire safety and security. But what would you think about staying in some random stranger's house that could be a serial killer? And I think if you were to do a quantitative survey, I think if you were to do, even if you were to do like an ethnographic study, like if you were to go to look at sofa surfing, I think a lot of the input you would have got would have been, this is a crazy idea. Like, why would you want to go and sleep on someone's sofa if you've got all of the facilities of an amazing hotel? So I just honestly don't think that it would have been really hard and expensive, I think, to test the business model of an Airbnb through traditional research means. And actually, I think it probably would have cost as much, if not more, to do that than it would have done to build the thing and just say, hey, look, we'll stick a couple of ads on Craigslist and we'll see if someone wants to come and stay, and then we'll ask them some questions afterwards. And so I think there are classes of new innovative product that not are impossible, but are kind of hard to kind of test. And I think this is also kind of one of the problems with research. I think people lean on research as a crutch to answer difficult questions. I actually think the research often in the early stages is much better at asking questions than it is to answer. So I think the research, you build up a map, you ask a bunch of interesting questions, and then you build some stuff in order to answer the questions. And so research shouldn't be seen as like validation. I think this is the kind of word that really annoys me. Like every designer says, oh, we need to validate the idea, we need to do research. And yeah, sure, there are certain things that you can use to validate. But I think if you've got 5 customers, go and build the thing. You're not going to piss anybody off. You're not going to upset anybody. You're not going to destroy your brand because you don't have a brand yet. If you were the Marriott and you had millions and millions of users, and suddenly you started selling people, spaces on airbeds, you're going to really, really damage your brand. But no one's heard of Airbnb. It doesn't matter if you mess up, So, yeah, I think you've got to have a bit of a balanced, blended approach. And again, it's this idea of like, there's not a perfect way. Play a lot of hands of cards. Many of them won't work. One of them will. Double down. Play again, play again.
So what are some of the red flags you should watch out to that you are no longer building something that's considered truly minimum?
That's an interesting question. Red flags. I try not to think in terms of red flags because it's quite an absolutist view. And I'm always much more of a relativist. I wouldn't necessarily say there are red flags, but I think there are trends. And I think one of the trends is just kind of like just building a beast. Like building, I talk about in the book about this idea of feature parity. A lot of founders believe that in order to compete in an existing market, the first thing you need to do is offer all the same features that exist in that market. So if you're going to try and build a better email client, or if you're going to try and build a better calendaring system, or if you're going to try and build a better whatever, you first have to match all the competition. And once you match all the competition, then you can add more features. And it becomes people talk about the feature fallacy, the sort of race to add the right feature. Like if you find the magical one feature that will differentiate you. The problem is that most of the time, if you're building that feature, other people are also getting feature parity. And also the reality, if you're chasing feature parity with a Google, you're never going to catch up because they've got more resources, more engineering, more research, all that kind of stuff. And so if you find yourself aiming for feature parity, you're probably doing something wrong. You're probably actually trying to service, this is the other real common problem, you're trying to service a too sophisticated customer. Most of the startups I know, they look at the market and go, oh my God, in order to win this market, we need to win clients in the big market. We need to win the big brands. Let's say you're a retailer or whatever, we need to, or, something in the retail space. We need to get Nike on board. We need to get Adidas on board. We need to get kind of, the big kind of blue chip brands on board, Coca-Cola, whatever. Those companies will have a big list of all the things they need. They will need security. They will need multiple account sort of management. They will need to be able to stop someone's account when they leave the company and add somebody else. So you end up building this sort of beast. They want reporting because they want to be able to see everything. Whereas if you go to Karma Cola, or if you go to a smaller kind of challenger shoe brand, where they've maybe got a marketing team of 5 rather than 500, they're not going to need all the bells and whistles. And so the way that you build small is you find the right niche market that is looking for the thing that you can provide. That one thing that will make their life better, that one thing that they need that the competition doesn't provide. And so for me, again, another big part of the book is how you go about finding these sort of beachhead customers, these small customers that you can land, you can learn from, you can grow, you can move into the next sort of area and you can grow again and again and again. And this is a big part. A lot of the time as designers kind of sort of malign product managers, and I can see why. We've all worked with our fair share of challenging product managers. But when product managers get this right, the product is a big part of the success, but nailing the business model is equally important. And if the product team can find the right beachhead customer, not the one that needs it most necessarily, but the one that's going to be willing to put up with an MVP, all the better.
So does it also apply for startup trying to naturally go for kind of an upmarket segment? They are building kind of an enterprise solution. So does the same principle still apply?
Well, but this is an interesting thing because I think you've conflated two areas there, upmarket and enterprise. Actually, for instance, if you look in the fashion space, as I mentioned, there are a lot of really big fashion brands that are actually quite small companies. So you can be a really well-known, Alexander McQueen. They sell £10,000 suits and they're on catwalks over the world. But actually their team is pretty small and pretty tight. And they don't have an office full of 10,000 people. They probably have an office full of 50 people, doing this kind of stuff. And so you can go up market and not necessarily go enterprise. And I guess, like I say, I think the problem a lot of people do is they immediately equate quality with enterprise. And when you're trying to service a company that got 10,000 staff members, you need to have all the bells and whistles. That doesn't mean, places where you have to do that, but it's just really hard. It's really hard to be minimal with enterprise. And it's hard to break through. I meet a lot of customers that really struggle because the market is small, their customers are really demanding. And, it might be that you've picked the wrong place to start. I mean, again, classic examples are kind of companies like HubSpot, who started serving small businesses. They started serving 1-person, 2-person marketing teams. They started servicing founders. But after 3 or 4 years, they decided to pivot. They had grown enough, they'd got enough customers, they'd made enough money, they'd raised their funding, and now they could go after the bigger players. And so for me, I think that's often a better approach, is you go after smaller businesses first that are going to be happy working with a smaller company. I mean, this is it. Like, if you're a 10,000 person business and you're selling to a 10,000 person business and you're 3 people in a room with seed money, they're not going to take you seriously. Whereas if you go after the 50-person business or the 100-person business, even if they've got an amazing brand, you nail them, you get a good logo, you get Alexander McQueen, you get whatever that logo is. Then when you go to your big Nikes and they'll see these well-known brands, they're going to have more trust in your ability to service them. And that will also be a couple of years later. So I think you've got to stage things better, if I'm honest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much for sharing. Do you want to talk about the growth equation a little bit? So in your book, you define the growth equation, which is a function of the market side of things and the product side of things. And for product, there is time to value stickiness over the function of friction. So which of these areas do you think designers can actually add a lot of value?
I think all of the elements of the product side are where designers can add value, because it's that's our domain, the product domain. Time to value is an obvious one. A lot of companies launch their product and the onboarding process takes ages. Getting that speed down so people get that aha moment in the first run rather than the 5th run. They get it in the first 5 minutes rather than the first 5 days. Everything we can do to kind of get value into the hands of customers as quickly as possible, I think, is really important. Obviously, just having that value experience once isn't enough to build user behaviors. I think this is the other thing. A lot of founders just think that because we've got more features than our competitors, people will naturally just come to our product and use them. But what happens is people come, they kick the tires, and then they'll get a deadline and they'll go back to using their old way of doing things. And so as sort of behavioral designers, we need to figure out how we can keep getting users to come back. How can we get users to not use a product once a month, but once a week, once a day, once every few hours? This is a lot of the behavioral design we can do. It's a lot of the research we can do, the discovery we can do to figure out what are the ways of getting this kind of these usage loops in. Obviously, I think particularly more usability and UX focused designers, friction is a big thing. We're just naturally, we're friction removers. We'll look at a 5-step process and figure out how we can make it 2. We look at a 2-step process and figure out how we can make it 1. And so removing all the areas of unnecessary friction, I think, are important. And then sort of stickiness as well is like, what are the delightful things we can do? In the whole sort of, I've lost the name of the model for a second, Carno model. In the Carno model, like, what can we do that are delighters, that kind of keep people coming back for more? They might be things that don't add a lot of actual value, but beautiful animation, really sort of, great visual design, a really smooth, easy to use, delightful interface. I mean, a lot of people are switching products not because of the functionality, like I say, but because of the way it works. We are so used to having great user experiences in our day-to-day life, on our mobile phones, in our computer games, in our desktop, TV sort of streaming boxes. We expect that same level of quality in our B2B products as well. And so all of this stuff is stuff that our design, designers just cut out to deliver. I also think designers can be really good on the marketing side of things as well. If we go and we talk to customers and we understand their needs, if we understand their mental model, if we understand the way that they see the world, we are much better at articulating what our product does in their language. I find a lot of founders that want to try and convince customers to see the world through their eyes rather than to represent their product through the eyes of their customers, which is much more efficient. And so I think I would love actually if designers didn't poo-poo marketing and kind of have a chip on the shoulder with sales, but actually saw them as massive allies. I meet so many designers when a salesperson says, hey, look, we need this feature because one of our accounts has told us that they need it and we're not going to be able to close this £1 million account if we can't get this feature. The natural reaction to the designer would be like, well, how do we know that there's more than one person out there that wants this? And my answer would be, it doesn't matter. If this is $1 million account or $500,000 account or a 10K account, that's at least one kind of like signal. Let's get the salesperson on side. Let's help them close that deal. Let's deliver that value. And then we can have a conversation around how we can explore more. I think designers and sales teams should be like the closest of buddies. I think designers and marketing teams should be the closest of buddies. So we need to get over that chip on our shoulder that we have and break down those barriers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of, you mentioned there's like delighters we could add, feature we could build for that one big enterprise customers. So what are some of the advice you can give designers to try to add value at this startup settings and maybe advocate for a little bit on the usability side and delighter side? I think a lot of founders that I've met are really good at pare down things. And sometimes it's a harder sell for a delighter. Any advice there?
I think there's a bunch of things. This is all the kind of stuff I help designers and design leaders with in my coaching. So we probably don't have enough time to get into lots of detail. And I think it really is dependent on company to company. I think one thing is a lot of designers I meet wait to be told what to do and then get angry when the thing that they're told to do isn't the thing that they wanted to do. It's almost like we're waiting for permission. And I think we need to take things in our own hands. It's not a good analogy, but I sort of joke that if the plumber came round to your house and said, look, Andy, are you happy with us using these new plastic pipes? My immediate question would be like, I don't know anything about plastic pipes. But this person's asking me about plastic pipes. Maybe there's a problem. No, let's not use the plastic pipes. Whereas if the plumber just puts the plastic pipes in because that's their job, because they're a professional, then there's no problem. And so I think as designers, we need to be just doing design work. We don't need to be asking permission. Like if we think that something is worth doing, if we think there's value to bake into the system, we should just go ahead and put it in there rather than asking permission. These kind of delighters are things that never appear on backlogs, but they are the things that good, clever designers can kind of bake into the experience. And actually, often once you've demoed these things, like these are kind of animations, they're kind of little kind of flourishes. You know, once you've added that flourish in and once a leader has seen it, often it's harder to kind of pull out. I think if all we do is show them the pared down version and then suggest, oh, well, if you give us more budget, we'll do more, like they're never going to do that. But if you show them how good it could be, I'm not talking about really expensive things. I'm not talking about we need to go off and do loads of research to decide. Like the classic example of a delighter is if you imagine a hotel room, you know, like it's the card on the pillow that the turn down staff leads you, telling you what the weather's going to be like in the morning. You know, it's a lovely personalised little handwritten thing. That doesn't cost a lot of money. That doesn't require a lot of effort. But it's something that like people remember more than whether the TV was 52 inches or 48 inches. You know, but the weird thing is in a product management meeting, the decision whether you're going to have a 48-inch CV or 52-inch CV is probably going to take up the whole afternoon. So I just say kind of like break with convention and just do it. But I do think there is a problem. I do think the current crop of designers are very risk averse. We tend to be more UX-y, we tend to be more interaction designy, we tend to be more usability focused. And we need to have a bit more of a willingness to explore and play and experiment and put some of the fun in. We've got to a sort of aesthetic where everything is pared back and minimalist. And I think we need to have a bit more fun. And we need to hire designers that are willing to explore a little bit more.
I'm all about having a little bit more fun. And I want to give you a little bit of time at the end of the chat so you can tell us all about your new book, The Growth Equation.
Well, thank you. I mean, we've already touched on it a little bit. So the public-facing way, obviously, is I have written a book to help founders be more successful in their product. And so how they can find their first 10, 100,000 customers, how they can launch their product, how they can find product market fit, how they can grow their business to the first million or 2 million users. All great. All the kind of things that founders love, designers generally don't really care about. But the reality is this book is a design book in stealth. I'm a designer. I believe design is massively important. When I read all the books out there about growth, none of them, like you said, or very few of them come from a design perspective. They come from a product management perspective. They come from a business perspective. They come from a marketing perspective. I read these books, and when they give you the solution, when they say like, hey, founder, if you want to improve your growth, you do X. And X is never going to talk to the design team. It's always run a marketing initiative. It's always hire a product manager. It's never design. And I got really frustrated reading all these books. Design was never even included. And so I wanted to create a design book in stealth. I know that design has a massive part to play in this story. I want founders to realize that. And so I've built a book that ideally, if you are a designer and you give this to your founder, they will start to be thinking about things the same way as you. Now, I don't talk a lot about design in the book. I mean, this is the weird thing. It's sort of the Jedi mind trick. If I said if I called the book like Design for Founders, no founder would ever read it because founders don't think there's any value in design. They'd probably buy it and give it to their designer and say, hey, read this. So it has to be about the thing they care about. And the thing they care about is growth. Now, the ironic thing is, like I said, this book is a design book for founders. But actually, I've found a massive audience in other designers because the designers already get it. They already get the value of design. But what the book is teaching them is how to think like a founder. It's how to understand the psychology of founders, understand the fear of founders, understanding the things they really care about and are really anxious about, and helping the designers pitch their services in a way that lands. I kind of joke in some of my talks, I think a lot of the time the way designers try and sell design is they go and do a big pitch where they talk about Apple and they talk about Nest and they talk about the design council, doing a graph of how better design-led companies perform on the stock market, the non-design-led companies. And they have this belief that if they just give this one pitch, suddenly all the founders will go, I never knew design was important before. Now I do. I'm going to lift you up on my shoulders and carry you out of the meeting as a hero. And it never happens. Basically, you give that pitch and the founders go, oh, that's nice. Thank you very much for that. Now let's get back to the important things of how do we reduce churn? How do we improve acquisition? How do we improve retention? And so as a designer, you have to speak their language. You have to understand and care about the things they care about, not to dismiss them. You need to be able to see things from their point of view. And so I think the book is a really great kind of set of X-ray specs that you can put on as a designer and suddenly kind of see the world through the founder's perspective. And then when you're trying to sell a design improvement, you can sell it in a way that's going to land. And so, yeah, I'd love designers to read this, to share it with their product peers, to share it with their founder peers, because, yeah, it's a design book in stealth.
Fantastic. So it sounds like the book is the thing that bridges the gap between founders and designers.
I hope so. If you are interested, obviously, you can grab the book on Amazon and all those places, or just go to andybudd.com/book, and that will point you to a whole bunch of other independent stores where you can buy the book as well. So yeah, go and check it out. And also you can go to that website, andybudd.com/book, and you can download the first 2 chapters for free. And the very first chapter is all about the equation, and the second chapter is all about why growth is important in the first place. And so that will give you a little bit of a taster for what's to come in the book.
Yeah, so everyone listen to this podcast should definitely purchase the book and read it. So any last piece of advice that you can give for designers that are currently in the startup world or trying to take the leap into startup world?
I mean, if you're already in the startup world, that's great. I mean, meet other designers that are also working in startups, try and encourage your founders to take money from VCs that understand design. C Camp are a very design friendly fund. You've got the Designer Fund in San Francisco. You've got Character. You've got a whole bunch of other amazing funds. Jake Knapp runs a fund who's a great designer. So there's an increasing number of VCs that get design. I also, again, a little bit self-serving, but get a coach, get an advisor. If your founder doesn't get design, introduce them to someone like me that does sort of founder coaching. And if you are, I coach a lot of design leaders in tech companies where I help them try and put into practice some of the topics we've talked about today. And if it's not me, like there's tons of other amazing coaches out there as well. So get coaching, get support, and yeah, go out there and kick ass, I'd say.
Yeah, love it. Thank you so much, Andy, for your time and share the insight around startup.
Thank you so much, Ran. It was an absolute pleasure. See you down the road.
Thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about the growth equation, make sure you download Andy's book at andybutt.com/book. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate you to give it a like and share it with a friend. It really helps more people discover the show. And if you enjoyed this episode, I think you might enjoy watch this one as well. I will see you in the next one.